Many of you might already know that vertical scaling cannot be scaled beyond a particular point, but very few of you might be knowing why. Why do we say like that? Do we have any reason around it, or you simply assumed that okay, this is correct? So let's see. So for vertical scaling, you could increase CPU, you could increase RAM. But when you say that vertical scaling cannot be scaled beyond a point, you mean to say that these cannot be scaled. So your question should be, why is it so that CPU and RAM cannot be scaled beyond a point? The answer would be because we have something called as motherboard. When you see a motherboard, it is like a platform of your chip, your CPU, your RAM, your buses, your data transfer buses, your logic transfer buses, etc. And it is much more complex. Let's assume that this is CPU, this is RAM, this is also a CPU, this is a RAM. Now you see that this area of motherboard is fixed, so you cannot add more CPU and RAM. You could ask that okay, motherboard size is fixed, so why can't I increase motherboard size and then I could increase number of CPU and RAMs? Okay, so my answer would be, let's say that you have increased motherboard size. Now what would happen? Now you could add more CPU, and this is RAM. So you have added more CPU and more RAM. Now your scaling is possible, right? No, you are wrong, because what would happen? So suppose this CPU wants data from RAM number 3. This is 3, this is 2, this is 1. What would happen? Now, because in previous design this CPU and this RAM was positioned here, so this distance was lesser. Now look at this distance. Now if you see this distance, it is now increased a lot, even if it has gone twice. Now you can say that okay, but what's the issue? The signal and data, these things travel with speed of light. Yeah, you are correct in one way, but not in every way. So if you see inside a motherboard, so this is a motherboard, this is motherboard. So this motherboard has wiring between CPU and RAM. That wiring contains copper and similar materials. Suppose copper is being used, then you know that the speed of electric signals depend upon the material in which they travel. So in copper, the signal travels with 50% to 70% of speed of light speed. Now so light speed is 3 into 10 to the power 8 meters per second. What would be 70% of 70%? So 70% meaning 0.7 of 3 into 10 to the power 8. Now 2.1 into 10 to the power 8 meters per second. Correct? Signal, or you can say data speed in motherboard is this one. Now what am I trying to convey here? I am trying to prove that if you increase motherboard size, then for a signal to travel from one end of motherboard to other end of motherboard, it would take much more time, and that time would be comparable to CPU speed. Now how do you compare CPU speed? In modern CPUs, you get around 5 gigahertz of frequency. What does it mean? 5 gigahertz means in 1 second the CPU cycles count is 5 into 10 to the power 9. If I ask you a simple question, what is the time taken for one CPU cycle? Time taken for one CPU cycle, what would it be? It would be 1 upon 5 into 10 to the power 9 second. Okay, so now how can you calculate the distance traveled with this speed and in this much time? You have simple formula, and the formula is distance equals to speed into time. Now what is the speed? 2.1 into 10 to the power 8 meters per second into time 1 upon 5 into 10 to the power 9 second. It would be 2.1 upon 5 into 10 to the power minus 1. That would be 2 upon 5 into 10 after rounding off, and it would be by 10. That would be 0.04 meters, and if you convert it into centimeter, it would be 4 centimeter approx, because we have rounded off from 2.1 to 2. Okay, now we know that distance would be 4 centimeter for one modern CPU to take one cycle. So if you make motherboard in such a way that it is smaller and distance between CPU and RAM is 4 centimeter, then it would take one CPU cycle, and if you build motherboard with bigger size, then it would take much more time depending upon the distance. Suppose this distance is 16 centimeter, then it would take 3 CPU cycle, and that is much more, because it is not that the operation is taking time, it is that due to the propagation delay it is taking time, and that would reduce the throughput would be reduced. Now you can say that what if I can somehow manage the CPU and RAM, and I can place them in so much denser way that the distance doesn't increase much. So you have created motherboard in such a way that CPU and RAM are very much closer. What would happen in this case? In this case, the density would increase. With increase of so much of density, it would increase due to increased heat. Motherboard and component, motherboard plus other comps would melt down. Now to solve this problem, you can say that you can apply cooling. But what would happen with this cooling? Suppose you are cooling with nitrogen. So we know that with nitrogen cooling also, it takes time to heat transfer, time to transfer heat from CPU, RAM and motherboard to nitrogen. It would take time, and with that much of time, the problem would be that again it will melt down. Now we have covered almost all of the possible cross questions on why it is said that vertical scaling cannot be scaled beyond a point. If you have any follow-up question on it, please let me know into comments and I will be more than happy to answer those. Until then, thank you.